That's it, Anthony. Can anybody see my presentation okay?
They can, yes, you're live.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Anne-Marie Swanepoel, and I know that most of you will know me already. I'm the Programme Manager for the Lough Landscape Partnership. At the start of most of our events, I would do a very short introduction to the Landscape Partnership and to the work that we do. But I'm just aware that looking at our attendee list tonight, there is quite a few of you that would have joined us before. So I will definitely try and keep my introduction as short as possible. We have a really good website. So if you are interested in finding out a bit more about the Landscape Partnership and the projects that we do, then please go and have a nosy. So we will send out a link to our website there when we send out the post-event survey after the event this evening. So I do apologize. I suffer with a bit of hay fever, so I'm rather croaky this evening. So the Lough Landscape Partnership, or Lelp, just as we would refer to it, it's a large heritage programme focusing around the shores and the communities of Upper and Lower Lough and also lots of our work focuses around Enniskillen. So there are several formal partners involved in the Landscape Partnership, with, of course, RSPB as the lead organisation. Our other partners include Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, Waterways Ireland, the National Trust, Upper Lough Region, Fermanagh Rural Community Network, and also Lough Heritage. The programme receives our main funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and of course all of the lottery players that buy tickets on a regular basis. So we're now 2.5 years into the delivery of a £3.3 million scheme of projects. We're currently delivering 23 projects and several other smaller community-based projects, and our work focuses on the delivery of projects in the areas of natural, built and cultural heritage. The themes of our work include creating access to local heritage assets, undertaking conservation work of priority landscapes and species, engaging the local community with their heritage, and then finding creative ways to engage people and share the unique stories of this area that is so rich in both heritage and culture. So one of the key focuses of the partnership throughout the lifetime of our programme is to act as a coordinated body to ensure that appropriate networks are formed to influence successful landscape scale management initiatives in the region. So basically, we really focus on bringing the right people together to celebrate the heritage of this area. So with that in mind, we work closely with various organisations and various individuals, community groups, to highlight and to celebrate some of the unique landscapes, unique features, and also some of the unique people that currently live and have lived in the past within this region. So we are very pleased also to be working with Queen's University Belfast on the delivery of a suite of 5 of our built heritage projects. So this evening our focus is on the study of vernacular buildings, like Rachel said. It's a very exciting project that aim to engage volunteers, local historical societies and other interested individuals to identify and record this aspect of our disappearing built heritage. We're keen this evening to engage with those of you who have already signed up to our learning portal, but also importantly, others that would have joined us tonight. We are really keen to kind of talk to you about the opportunity to undertake some free online training about vernacular structures and surveying, and then to also give you the opportunity to form part of our upcoming field studies initiative to undertake some surveys of local buildings and vernacular features in this region. So really, we want to hear from you. If you want to participate in the training and in the field study, Also, if you own or if you are aware of any vernacular structures in Fermanagh. And then also, as part of one of our other projects, the Heritage Skills Project, we will soon be offering some courses in lime mortar repair and also thatching. So do let us know if you're interested also in any of these, or indeed if you have a building that can be used as part of a practical training for those undertaking the courses. Or of course, if you are currently undertaking a renovation project, or if you're thinking of undertaking one, then it'll be really great to hear from you also. So I'm going to be here until the end of the event. So if you've got any questions about the partnership or any of the opportunities we have on offer, then please do ask that during the Q&A session, or feel free to contact Hazel Long. She's our Heritage Project Manager that is leading on these specific suite of projects. So you're all incredibly welcome, and thank you so much for the time that you've taken to join us this evening. I really hope you will enjoy this evening's event, and I'm also very grateful to all of our speakers and all of our contributors this evening, all of which are key voices and key experts in this area. So thank you very much. That is all from me, and I will pass you back to Rachel now. So thank you, everybody. Do enjoy.
Excellent. Glad. Rachel, in her introduction, she mentioned the image of Irish vernacular as being thatched buildings, and to be honest, that's a very fair view, because it's the view which is constantly put out there about Irish vernacular. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that particular comment. But the very first slide here, my cover slide, shows something rather different. It's corrugated iron, and corrugated iron has become really probably the vernacular building material, curiously, even though it was invented back in the 1820s and 1830s in Britain and in various other countries, and was used initially to cover big dockland warehouses in London and railway stations. But it has been adopted into the vernacular tradition, not just of Ireland, but of practically everywhere in the world, from Indonesia to Iceland. So it's the vernacular covering material de rigueur at the moment, often covers over an existing underlying thatch. But anyway, there you have it. So corrugated is not to be seen as some sort of an ugly material. It's part of the vernacular tradition now, well and truly, and has been for, oh God, close to 200 years at this stage. So we'll move on now. Oops, a daisy. How do we to move on the screen? Oh yeah, right. Then with regards to just built heritage in general, we're all very familiar with the what you might call the coffee table books, and the coffee table books for architectural heritage in Ireland are largely focused on the big house. So here we have Castle Ward, which would be reasonably typical of the larger houses of Ireland. But country houses like this really are sort of a blip in the architectural continuum. They arrived towards the end of the 17th century and lasted into the early 19th. So they're actually, even though they're extremely visible, very well studied, highly detailed, and so on, they're actually a sort of a blip in the architectural continuum, whereas the vernacular is not. The vernacular is something which is very, very continuous from our earliest ancestors. And the other aspect of the built heritage, which gets a lot of press, a lot of coverage, a lot of tourism visibility, if you like, is the antiquities of the country, of the islands, I should say. So this is Bonamargee Friary. Usually these things are in state care, well visited, and so on. So these items are often seen as being the architectural heritage of Ireland. But on the other hand, we have smaller big houses, if you like to call them that. Then we have the vernacular coming down to scale, and in terms of, and then the likes of labourers' cottages, from the late 19th century into the mid 20th century. And you could see this as the left-hand side of this slide essentially is what gets 90% of the coverage in works on architectural heritage, in programming on television and so on. And the right-hand side of it is actually much more typical of the built heritage of the island of Ireland, or in fact any country. And this sort of distinction in terms of presentation and study and so on is an issue throughout the world. It's not a peculiarly Irish issue or phenomenon. You could even say, for example, that that's a neighbour of mine in the bottom right there, the late Mick Nail, and his house is just really, really typical. There are thousands probably of houses like his, just even in County Tipperary. So that is a part of the architectural heritage of the island of Ireland. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The middle right photograph there is from County Fermanagh, that lovely thatched house, which I think is on its uppers now at the moment in County Fermanagh. Now, the vernacular building tradition of Ireland has many resonances with other parts of the world. It's the combination really of features and materials and the, if you like, the mentality of the people, which really exemplifies Irish vernacular building tradition. So you could take thatch, for example, but thatch is found throughout the planet. You'll get it in, on Lake Titicaca in Peru. You'll get it everywhere, the marshes of Iraq and so on. There's nothing peculiarly Irish about thatch or thatching, but it does link us with the globe in general, a point that was made earlier by Rachel. And these are some of the things which I think are quite important in discussing vernacular architecture in Ireland in particular. So it's island wide. It doesn't stop at a border. The border is irrelevant when it comes to vernacular tradition, or in fact most folk tradition as well. But there are absolutely similarities with Atlantic Britain. For example, the lobby entry plan form, which is very typical of eastern parts of the northern counties and the whole eastern and southeastern part of the island in general. That's something which is assumed to have come in with the plantation period of the 17th century. So there have been influences coming in from Britain and probably from further afield as well. I'll touch on some of that later. Irish vernacular buildings are modest. There's no two ways about it. We can't pretend that they're world beating. They don't quite rank with the pyramids or the Colosseum in Rome or anything like that. Our buildings are modest. They're also modest in comparison with a lot of the vernacular architectural heritage of Britain, for example, or parts of the continent. Our buildings are small. It's as simple as that, and we can't pretend that we have the same variety as there is, for example, in Britain or in France. There just isn't. But it's nevertheless ours, and that is the key point of it, is our vernacular building tradition. It's something for us all to cherish. I mentioned about our earliest ancestors and the links with them. It's in terms of materials, it's in terms of forms like rounded forms and so on, and some of the ideology in relation to setting out the use of space and the different folk traditions involving the guarantee of good luck, for example, for a family and for the farm animals. All of this is something which can be found throughout time and throughout the world. The vernacular building tradition of Ireland also contributes to global diversity, and we shouldn't be shy about this. We say, well, we are contributing to global diversity in a time when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about biodiversity. This is, if you like, this is architectural and cultural diversity, and it is important for that reason. That's one of the markers of its importance. It's deeply rooted in tradition, and tradition I've highlighted in red here, because tradition is the cornerstone of all vernacular architecture, all vernacular landscape, all vernacular and folk traditions. It's the root, absolutely the root. If you're uncertain as to whether something is vernacular or not, what's its origins, what's its roots, and if it's rooted in tradition, well then it's it's more likely to be vernacular than not. The labourers' houses were designed by drafters in the Office of Public Works, for example, or the old Board of Works, or by the landed estates. So by definition, they're not vernacular. Likewise, country houses, modern housing estates can't be regarded as vernacular. The bungalow can't be regarded as vernacular, but is nevertheless something which responds to people's needs. And I make the point there that it should be integral to our society, that vernacular buildings and the traditions that they embody should be integral to our society. We may have cast them aside in the 60s and the 70s, but it's time to rediscover and recapture what we almost lost. This is some clay wall repairs, the sort of thing that we want to really encourage in terms of rediscovery of crafts, but also in terms of the practicalities of repairing existing vernacular buildings. Knowledgeably rediscovering our vernacular will help us create culturally relevant and sustainable new architecture in places. There's almost an assumption that that new architecture is going to solve all our problems, but it can only help if it's based in culturally appropriate and long-standing ways of looking at the landscape of using buildings. You can't really just say, there you are now, go and live in that. It's a sort of a dialogue between the people who are going to live and use buildings and whoever is doing the building work. In more traditional societies, builders are also conveyors of tradition. They're just not simply people who design things, but they're deeply immersed in the traditions. And at the very end, I just say recording our vernacular is the first step in this process of rediscovering our vernacular. I think that's one of the very important things about the Lough Erne work, is rediscovering and recording buildings, which leads to rediscovery of features, of traditions, of crafts, and of ways of looking at the landscape, ways of looking at building and architecture and so on. In all of these slides, I'm acknowledging the source of the images. Where I don't give a source, the images are from my own collection. So our vernacular building tradition gives a lot to us, and these are some of the features that, or some of the things that vernacular building tradition gives us. Sense of place is a very important thing at the moment. It's something which is emphasised quite a lot by state authorities, by local authorities. Healthy and earth friendly is another one, which is very important in this era of global warming and of highly attuned awareness of sustainability, for example. Connection with forebears and cultures, I've already gone through in some detail there. And then building crafts. These are traditional building crafts which are environmentally friendly. They're rooted in tradition. They give a sense of place. They make connections with our forebears, and they make connections with other cultures. So crafts really is centrally important to all of this. And I was delighted that Thatch and lime mortar and so on was mentioned, because this is absolutely appropriate. This illustration on the right is a map that was done back in the 70s, and it relates to the bed out shot. So this little feature at the back of a building in which a bed was accommodated so that it wouldn't protrude too much into the room. There's a couple of illustrations of it in this talk, and this is a feature of northwestern Atlantic districts, not just of Ireland, but of Britain, Iceland, Scandinavia, Northern Europe. So we're connected to other parts of the world, certainly our neighbourhood, which is Northwest Europe. This is an illustration from, would you believe, the Berbers of Morocco. This is a dwelling house, and it has opposite doors, which is a feature of a lot of buildings from the western half, northwestern part of Ireland. And you can see that cattle are kept in the lower part of this house. And one of the quite interesting things about it is the identification of the stable with the female. And then there's also the identification of the cattle with, the cattle with the female and the horse with the male. And this is something which actually features in Irish tradition. So it's quite interesting. And in traditional societies like the Berbers, the connection with our earliest ancestors are more apparent than they are in the average traditional Irish house today. We've lost that sort of connection with, if you like, the more anthropological aspects of vernacular architecture. And in relation to the need to record, this is a statement that was made 75 years ago, that there's a vast amount of field work needed to record typical cottages and so on, as you call them. And this obviously is something that the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership is going to tackle to some degree at least. So that's very good. This is a building in West Wicklow, very unprepossessing, but nevertheless has an intact wicker chimney hood. So this is the sort of thing that it remains to be discovered. And in terms of building types, we obviously have houses, which form, if you like, probably the most interesting part, because they're the most varied, the most technically interesting. They're dwelling places. They will have furniture and all sorts of fittings, which are of extreme interest. But farm buildings are probably more numerous. Then we have forges, such as the top right there, lime kilns, of course, small bridges, if they're made by local people just to serve, immediate local needs. They could be considered to be vernacular. Sweat houses, and sweat houses are a feature of County Fermanagh and neighbouring counties like Leitrim and so on, and all the way over actually to County Louth. So there are peculiarly regional features in County Fermanagh. There are also smaller vernacular things, and this is a range. So a well, a churn stand, a wayside shrine, a footbridge, a trough associated with either farming or with forges, the millstone associated with milling, or again with forges, because a lot of millstones were used as banding stones for the wheels of carts. And then gates, who doesn't know of dozens of gates in their immediate area, many of them of different forms, identifiable to particular forges, but gates and recording gates and preserving and maintaining old forged gates is really very, very important. And landscape features, if you like, large features then include whole areas of abandoned ridges, potato ridges, cereal ridges and so on. Walls and field boundaries in general can be very local or regionally diverse. And then pathways, footpaths, such as the one that I feature here in the slide, are very can be very slight in the landscape, but I think they're something which we should very much consider. And there are features associated with rivers and lakes. So top right there, these little sort of cuts in the side of rivers to accommodate river boats for fishing, and then eel weirs, very well known on the Ban, for example. So we have the normal, shall we say, everyday features buildings like houses and dwelling houses, but I've mentioned a whole pile of things which are not buildings per se, but are structures of vernacular interest, and then landscape features. So I think it's important to consider all of these things. They make up the vernacular landscape. In the dwelling house, there is the focus is very much on the kitchen. The kitchen is absolutely central, both physically and, if you like, psychologically. Within dwelling house, it's probably the single most important aspect of vernacular architecture in general in Ireland is the traditional kitchen, with its heart, with the tradition of sleeping, with the crafts that went on, mostly carried out by the women, I have to say. The vast majority of scenes that involve work tend to be the women. The men seem to have had a jolly old time of it. Some of these illustrations are from Claudia Kinmont's books on vernacular interiors and on vernacular furniture. Then, of course, you know, you don't get absolute intact interiors. You get change, and change in the photograph on the right is indicated by the cooker brought in at the time of rural electrification and the light dangling from the ceiling. But we should record all of the different features of vernacular house, not just those that we think are of, you know, real vernacular interest. The whole suite of things, the changes, the adaptations, these are also important. Recording methods are very varied. Photography is probably the number one. We take a photograph, but we also need to identify where the photograph was taken, why we've taken the photograph, the date, and so on. That's, I think, quite important, not just simply to take photographs, but to take photographs with a particular purpose in mind. So here's a photograph that I took recently in County Clare. I ask myself when I take photographs, why am I taking them? Am I taking them because I think that maybe a fortnight later somebody's taken a bulldozer to it, or somebody's driven a road through it, or am I, you know, taking photographs so that I can present them at presentations like this? It's probably both of those reasons and others. I'm learning about the vernacular of another bit of the island. And then sketching, drawings, plans, all of this sort of thing. Oka Campbell back in the 30s was making plans and drawings, the very first ones of vernacular architecture in Ireland. But people also can use video to capture a place or a building. Written descriptions are important. The National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, also historic buildings in Belfast, rely a lot on written description, which conveys the significance of a building or a place. Documentary research and all the rest of it there. Oral history recording, I think, is also quite important. So there's many ways of recording and presenting the vernacular. And then in terms of descriptive recording, these are field sheets that I put together myself back in the 1990s for a project I was working on in North County Dublin. So they detail all the features that I would want to capture, including religious and magical features, for example, not simply structural features, but anything which is of significance. Then I had another sheet that was for miscellaneous structures. It could be wells, it could be lime kilns, and then one for farmsteads or steadings to link everything together. And again, just a couple of illustrations that will sort of present how you, or give an indication of how material is presented. This is an illustration by Bob Kingston, and it's a reconstruction of the interior of a byre dwelling. So a dwelling which was shared by the family and by the milk cattle, and this is on Achill. So it's a nice illustration. And then these are ways of presenting maps. The bottom left is one of my maps from South Kilkenny showing different types of settlement form, and it's a blizzard of icons. So that's quite an intense local presentation. And then the top right, then we have a distribution which shows it's byre dwellings, the tradition of the byre dwelling, and then the survival is the hatched area there of County Mayo. So you're going from the very intense analysis in one part of the country. It could be the Lough Erne area, up to the very the very large scale, very generalized, gives a sort of an immediate impression of a particular feature of Irish vernacular architecture. And then this is one of my informants in Donegal when I was working on my PhD, and I just think it's terribly important to remember that it's all about people, and academics in particular like to say it's all about people, and then go and ignore the people and go and do a whole load of other stuff which they might find in some ways more interesting. But I found that in my own PhD work, and also in work that I'd done before, that you can get into the technicalities of description, of mapping and so on, but what really adds the interest and the immediacy is actually talking to people. So I did recorded interviews with people in different parts of the island, and that was not just useful, but I actually found it to be absolutely crucial for discovering the, if you like, the dynamics of the place and how people related to their place, how they identified and thought of their place, and also how they felt other people thought of them and their buildings and their little settlements and so on. So that's just a very quick run through, some thoughts about Irish vernacular architecture. So I'm going to leave it at that point and hand back then to the facilitators. So I'll leave it at that.
Hear me okay?
Can hear you okay? You're now live.
Great. Hello, folk. How are you all doing? Thanks to Barry for a great talk. It was very interesting. Lots of information there that I'm looking to explore over the next few months as we're going to embark on some renovations in our cottage. As you can see, I'm sitting in the oldest part of our cottage here. If you can see, look behind me, you can see that I think it's definitely vernacular. I'm sure Barry would agree. We've got it's quite rustic, what I would call, but some detailed stonework at the back there that maybe not in the best condition. We might need to look into, so the lime mortar courses will be one I'll be definitely signing up for. Just want to give you a little background into myself. We moved into this house about 13 years ago. It's a family home. My grandparents, great grandparents lived here, and most of us were familiar just with the main house, and this end of the house here was just what we just thought an outbuilding or for storage. And when we moved in approximately 12 years ago, 13 years ago, we decided to take a look at it closer. I am a designer and a stylist, and I also work with brands, interior brands, and we just thought this would be a beautiful backdrop to just showcase some lovely pieces of furniture, for example, and artwork. And it's worked out really well. We used the back wall. I don't know if you can see it properly, but behind me, if you take a closer look, we had some photographs, but a few technical issues have arisen. So I'm just going to chat my way through it, and hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm talking about from the view behind me. So initially, what we decided to do was just take a look at the building and what we had. I wanted to keep it as much as possible, as close to as it was originally. There was, if you remember one of Barry's slides, the wall he was talking about, and the two doors, we have both of those either side here, so which we have kept. The wall, unfortunately, was rubble. Nearly most of it had fallen down. We did have to take that out for safety, and there was a lofted area. So if you can see the back wall there, the loft did run across there. On the side where possibly the cattle would have been initially, that had fallen down, so the loft then came to the rest of the building. We have a big fireplace facing me here in front, and that was lofted. So when we looked at, when we lived here initially, we didn't realise the scale of it. So it has quite a nice fireplace. It's actually a brick fireplace, and it was painted over, but it was never really damaged. So it's still very much intact, and it's not in use at the moment, but we hope to, in the renovations, if possible, to bring it back into use. I don't think as an open fire is maybe not the safest these days, but as a stove or something like that, just to bring it back to the heart, because it does feel very much like the heart of the room down here, and which would be the initial cottage. The main house, we think, might have been a later addition. We're not quite sure. It had been modernised like many houses over the years, and if you couldn't really tell that it was a stone building, it had been, the roof had been raised up in points, and new roof put on, new windows, all sorts of modernisation going on, possibly, as in Barry was saying, in the 60s and the 70s, when my grandparents were active renovators themselves. They used lots of colour, and they did lots to try and bring it up to date. When we got our hands on it in the 10 years ago, so we decided to try and bring it back to see what was left of the bones. Luckily, nice panelling still exists in the house. We've exposed some of the stonework, just possibly to see its condition, really, to see, as with I think learning with vernacular buildings, that the quality is just not always good. So that's a worry for us when we do go into taking on more renovations, is to see just what state the stonework is in, and then of course we probably have to lime mortar over parts like that as well. I'm not sure what is. I think there's probably in the main house concrete put over in different areas is probably a mismatch. So all the tools that will be taught on, as part of this great initiative is great for us. I work a lot on social media and sharing all my journey so far, and intend to share the journey of the cottage as it goes along. We have quite a lot of followers who are interested, and I get messages daily about from especially younger couples who are finding it difficult to maybe get mortgages and things, and do have a family home or a cottage that maybe years ago, I know when we decided to move in here, there was several eyebrows raised at the thought of it, that you couldn't live there was really what, even though it was to me quite habitable. And really at the end of the day, when you've got heat, you've got running water, and you've got plumbing, the rest can come in time. If you are willing to forgo not a lot of the home comforts, but you can just really have a lovely building, then that can kind of breathe itself. It doesn't have to be taken over necessarily with all the mod cons. It doesn't have to. You don't have to get it and take it apart and just to make it modern. So that's what we hope to do here. We hope to make it as habitable as possible, as in as comfortable as possible, without actually taking too much away. That could be difficult. We have wiring at the minute that's been in place from the 50s. Things like that have to come out. And issues with grants and things like that, there are small grants available, but the problems I have found with those is that they don't seem to know enough themselves. So the people going out to say give a small grant for cottages, they want you to basically make it look, they want the basic windows to go in to kind of, and then I think that does destroy the integrity of these old buildings. If that's an issue that I don't know how will be resolved. You're given, obviously if you're for grant you're given, but it's supposed to spread out through a whole house, a small amount, say 25,000, to basically take a roof off, put it back on. They want you to dry line, where I don't want to dry line. I would prefer to do it properly, do it the old ways, but we don't know how that's going to pan out and how that's going to work out. But I think the way it has been is just get in and bring it up to building standards is the only issue, instead of being an issue of trying to keep the place as it should be, or try and preserve. So that's another issue, but I'll move away from the issues and saying the good things about it. Vernacular buildings on your own properties, or if you own one, or if you've seen one down the end of the lane, is that they're, currently the rustic style is all in. It's all, luckily, people just love it, especially for tourism and the things. I think if you have a place to, you don't have to go in and, put in underfloor heating or anything like that. People do like the old ways. They would like to probably go in and get a smell of turf. They'd like to, if they had to go out to and get their, maybe not necessarily their water, but if they did have to, not have all the home comforts that you would associate with a modern house. I think that kind of experience is something that people are looking for now. So if you do have a place that it mightn't necessarily have to spend as much money to bring it up to date as you would think. Also, I personally use this as a background for my work. Just magazines, and I work with lots of different brands who love the quality and the textures in the house. Rather than the standard builds, they love something rustic and something just unique. So we have lots of those. I think for issues we have, as I've said, about grants and things like that, and is also information out there. I think we have at one point there was maybe not enough information, and now there's not necessarily too much, but if you Google a Google search on what do I do with my stone walls, on French drains, how do I, you know, keep damp out, there's nearly too much information. It's a bit of a minefield. I tend to look onto Facebook pages like cottageology and things like that to if I want advice, but again there's lots of different opinions on that, and everybody's got different ideas. You've got the purists, and then you have those who just want to go in and spend as little as possible, and then you have the a lot of us in the middle ground who do want to work with the building and want to, you know, preserve it as much as possible, but we still have families, and we need some level of home comforts. For us, we're hoping to put on a little extension. It should be, well, it would be out to this, no, it's not to this side, to this side. And I think I was talking about corrugated. The roof of this house itself is corrugated. We have just insulated the inside here, and the original tin is still on the outside. Well, probably not original for the first time. It might have been thatched originally, and the original house, big house, may have been thatched. But what we intend to do is to use corrugated in a more modern way. So we intend to use the extension, and it's corrugated down the sides. I'm sure people have seen that in some of the modernizations of cottages, is that the whole corrugated the whole extension. So that's something that we are hoping to do, and just to make it probably a safer place to live, with electrics, to have windows. It's quite a noisy place here to live, but we're hoping that all of that will be good and will work out for us. But also, let me see, so we have other issues, I suppose, we're facing now are supply of materials, and with Brexit, like that, basically getting word, you know, if you find what you need to get, for flooring initially, there's several layers have to go in, and Brexit seems to have brought up a lot of issues with that, and it's even in terms of that stuff cannot be posted here, or the cost of it is a big issue for us as well. I think something that is relatively small could have a really big postage fee that is quite difficult for us to work with, unfortunately. But but hopefully with the help of programs like this, that we can get advice and a list of people who do know and can help, and maybe, you know, come and take a look at a property for somebody, because obviously every place is different, and they're all, you know, they might have a lot of similarities, but for example ours is sloping, or so we're going downhill. This room, we call this place down below, because you're quite a bit lower than the main house. For drains and French drains and things around the outside, getting rid of concrete, and it's a scary thing, as well as foundations and things. A lot of these houses don't have them. We're lucky that we don't have too many issues with damp in this house, and as really lucky with temperature in here. So on a hot day you come in here and it's lovely and cool. On a warm day it does retain the heat, especially upstairs with we have stoves, and the heat is just lovely upstairs and warm. This part of the house is the corrugated iron. It is quite cold in winter, but it's not that it's not livable. It's very livable. We have our stove, one stove. It's not particularly big, and you fire that up and it's warm enough here. So I think for people to actually come in and think about living in these places, that you just don't have to go and spend loads of money on it. Go and live on it, get used to the place, take a look around. We've lived with this place a lot, made changes very slowly, and we don't want to make mistakes, and just not overdoing it as well. Like don't rip things out, just think about them. Just make, you know, you can make features out of something. The wall we took out in the middle, sometimes I do regret it was mostly fallen down, but it would be a regret that I didn't maybe try and keep that. But as I say, we didn't know as much then as we do now about things like that. But again, hoping that this programme, with if everybody talks about it and, you know, chats to family members, and I will be sharing my journey. We have different magazines coming this week to document the house as it is right now. So that's good to have, you know, even just for like good quality photographs just to show now, and then they will come back again later. And we will be documenting it all on, I'll be documenting on Instagram and on Facebook. And I think we should have the handles up at some page, but I think that's probably, I'm not sure in time wise, am I over or am I under? But
that's brilliant, Kathy. Thank you very much.
Okay, but yeah, so that's
it.
it. Look, I'll hand back, and anyways, any questions or any mails or any help, I would be happy to take help from any and all angles with this going forward. We do intend to start pretty much straight away. We want to move the kitchen down into this area. I do want to preserve it as much as possible, and to, you know, not do any damage to the property while we're doing it, but obviously we need it to a good standard to live in as well. So if any help.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to move on to Dr. Colm Donnelly from Queen's University.
Hello.
Yes, Colm, you're live.
I am live. You can hear me?
We can hear you.
Right, I'm going to try and share my screen. Can people see that?
They will see it now. Yep, that's you.
They can see it.
They can see it.
Brilliant. Technology works. So often it doesn't, but it has worked this evening. Right, okay, so I'm going to sort of continue on the theme of tonight, and we've had Barry giving the overview on vernacular architecture, and we've had Kathy talking about the wonderful work that she's doing with her house. I'm just going to start talking more about the surveying, the actual surveying of the buildings, projects that I have been involved in, and my own interest in vernacular architecture. And that really kicks off, I suppose, whenever I was a kid, but also when I was working with this lady, my very good friend, Margaret Gallagher, and her lovely thatched cottage at Mullylusty outside Belcoo. These are photographs that appeared in a newspaper spread all about Margaret and her lifestyle. And I thought they were fantastic photographs of her, especially the fire one. The thing about Margaret is, you know, she is dedicated to her lifestyle, her traditional lifestyle. So you can see her there, you know, the peat fire, going out to the well to get the water, the tully lamps that she uses in the evening. And so much so that whenever Eileen was, my wife Eileen, who's from Derrygonley, whenever her and William Rolston were doing the Fermanagh History and Society volume, they got Margaret to actually give reflections on her life and her house and her attitudes to the vernacular in County Fermanagh. And it's a fantastic read. It's a short read, but it's a fantastic read. The thing about this is Margaret and the lifestyle that she has is, you know, it's not mainstream. I'll put it that way. Not anymore. And yet this would have been the mainstream if we go back 100 years ago, because none of us are that far away from having ancestors who lived under thatch. What I think is actually quite, you know, shocking is the fact that we have more state care monuments in Northern Ireland. I think it's about 190 state care monuments in Northern Ireland. There are more state care monuments than there are surviving thatched vernacular buildings in the 6 counties. I find that quite shocking. And so, you know, something like Margaret's cottage, which is lived in on a day and daily basis, becomes all the more precious to us. Now this decline, it's understandable why there has been a decline, because people want better levels of comfort. There is an association with poverty with these houses. And you've had over the last 40 years the whole bungalowization that has occurred in Irish society, as people have moved away from these old houses, which are looked on as the past, and we want to move away from the past. And 25 years ago, another native of the county, Caroline Maguire, who's an inspector, built architecture in the Historic Environment Division, she published this book, A Sense of Loss, the Survival of Rural Traditional Buildings in Northern Ireland. And they went over an area of 49 townlands. They looked at the situation as it was in 1909, looking at the Ordnance Survey information. They went out and did surveys of the buildings to see what survived. The main findings were that 49% of rural buildings that were recorded in those 49 townlands in 1909 are gone. No trace at all remaining of the original buildings. 39% survived, but they were in an altered form, and only 12% of them had survived intact with the original layout and the correct roofing materials and windows and doors and chimneys. So clearly you've got a heritage resource here which is under great pressure. And I suppose to illustrate that, these are two really good books that have been published over the last, 30 years. The first is Irish Cottages by Walter Pfeiffer and Maura Shaftry. And the second is Joseph Gallagher and Greg Stevenson's Traditional Cottages of County Donegal. But whenever Gallagher and Stevenson were doing their book, what they did at the start of it was they went through and identified houses from Donegal which had featured in the Irish Cottages book and showed them how those buildings were faring. And here you can see this one from Inishowen and at Uris Hills. In 1990, it was a thatched house, it was lived in. 20 years later, the roof is coming down in off it, and it's still got its nice blue door, but the house itself is falling into ruin. And it would be interesting now, 10 years on from the publication of that second book, be interesting now to go back and look at that building to see what condition it's in now, or if it even survives on the landscape. Has it been demolished? Speaking of books, this is one of my favourite books. It's a little known book, but it's a really interesting one. It's a guy, John Moe, who was based at Queen's in the Department of Geography. And it was a study that was undertaken by the Northern Ireland Council for Social Services. It was published in 1947, and it was rural life in Northern Ireland. Now, the new state hadn't been long set up in 1947 when this was published. But what it does is it gives you an insight into what society, rural society, was like at that time. And things have moved on dramatically since. The mechanisation that has occurred since that time, the urbanisation that has occurred, the movement of people from the countryside into the towns, all of this that has happened in the second half of the 20th century. The view that Mogi is presenting in 1947, it's still a 19th century Ulster landscape. It's got its small rural towns and villages, and they are at the heart of the rural economy. These are the places where the people come in for the markets to bring their produce, to sell, to barter, to bring home the essentials, tea, tobacco, the items that are going to be needed on the farm. And this is something that we have to remember, is that, you know, throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, we're a rural agricultural economy. We do have our big heavy industries in Belfast, we have the linen industry in Derry, but by and large, the majority of Ulster at this time is a rural agricultural economy. And as I say, when we move into the second half of the 20th century, that starts to change, and starts to change quite rapidly. So much so that this is a really, really important place, the Ulster Folk Museum. And it was inspired by Professor Eston Evans, who is sort of almost godlike figure as the years go by, because he set up He was the first lecturer in geography at Queen's. He set up the Department of Archaeology at Queen's. He set up the Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's, and he was also instrumental in setting up the Ulster Folk Museum, working with two of his students, George Thompson and Alan Gailey. And the idea was, Evans, Thompson and Gailey, they realised that actually we were beginning to lose so much of the character of the Ulster countryside as these changes occurred, as the linen industry went into decline, as housing started to change, as people moved away into the towns. And so what they did was, they, inspired by what was being done in Scandinavian countries, they came up with this concept of having a folk park where people could come and see examples of these houses, these properties, these small scale industrial units as they were at and around about 1900. And you can see that process. These are photographs of that process in action. This is the first building that they moved to the museum. Duncroon Cottier's house near McGilligan on the north coast. And you can see that is the house and its condition before it was moved. It had been identified and had been selected for being removed, stone by stone, numbered, taken away, and then rebuilt at the museum. So 60 years ago, this process was started. And it's a very basic house. It probably belongs to around about 1750. It's got a thatched roof. It's got a single kitchen and a single bedroom. The floors are earth, the walls are stone. And I have used the Ulster Folk Museum as a resource for our students, because a lot of our students really have no experience or knowledge of life in these types of houses, or even anyone who has ever lived in one of these types of houses. And we've used the Folk Museum as a place to take the students to teach them how to survey buildings. As Barry was saying in his talk, these are simple buildings. They're small rectangular buildings, maybe with a single room, maybe with two rooms. They're not big. And because of that, they're actually really ideal for introducing students to the process of undertaking surveys. And that's what we'll be doing with our own training course for the Lough Erne Landscape Partnership Scheme. It is taking people who've never surveyed buildings before, taking them out into the countryside and going and teaching them how they can create scaled plans and elevations of these buildings, which are under threat. Now, this was carried out in a grand scale in Scotland. It was a programme that was carried out by the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland. And they called it Scotland's Rural Past, but they were very much concerned with recent past. They were concerned about the vernacular buildings in Scotland. And they had also, they wanted to communicate with local communities and to engage the public in this process. Very much, you think of the Royal Commission of Ancient and Historic Monuments, it's sort of, people who go out and they survey castles and monasteries. What they wanted to do was to show the immediacy of these buildings that are on your landscape, which belong to the past, which belong to you, and which you can then start recording, and you can record the history of the people who lived in your area in the recent past. Now, I've done some similar work myself, not on that scale, but in some projects where you're coming to an old building and you're trying to build up the story of that building, because what we try to do, this isn't really very much different from any other aspect of archaeology. What we're trying to do when we go out on an excavation or a survey of a castle or whatever, we're trying to use the fabric of the building to tell us the story of the building. And if a building survives on the landscape, very often it has had periods of change and adaptation. So we're trying to look at those periods of change. and then trying to tie together the historical narrative. What do we know about this house, and what do we know about the people who lived in it? Because really what we're interested in is that social and economic story. So you look at this building here, this little house in Dromore, County Tyrone, you can see immediately there's things there that show what I'm talking about. You can see that they've plastered it. The front wall was plastered at some stage with concrete, with cement. You can see that they put in windows with iron frames. And you can see they've added on a little porch with red brick. But if you take those elements away from it, underlying that, you have got a house, a very simple house using local materials, local stone, that has been gathered up and used to create the form of that building. Now we go to the historical record. As I say, there's very little recording of any of these buildings, of who lived in them. But the Griffiths valuation of the 1860s is very important, because you've got maps, and if you've got the 1860 map, it shows the location of a house. It also tells you who was living in that house in 1860. And then there's the revisions, and you can chart the whole history of ownership of that property through time. This is all contained, the revised valuations are contained in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. And we can see here, this was the Comiskys. The Comiskys were living here in 1860, but by 1873, Comiskys, the name's been crossed out, and it's now John Coulter. So this is the plan that I undertook of this building. And what you see is actually quite a complex story. It starts out as a byre house, a dwelling where in the 18th century you would have had one half of the internal space devoted to the cattle. The cows would have been in the lower half, and then at the top half you would have had the hearth and the family living. No division of space within that unit. Very simple building. But evidently in the 19th century this was viewed as being unsuitable habitation, and what they do is they add on an extension. They add on a living room and they add on a bedroom, and it's got a loft above the bedroom. And then in the 20th century they decide that they need more space, they need another bedroom. So what they do is they move in to the old byre dwelling again, and they put up a breeze block wall and they make that into another bedroom. And the old section of the byre dwelling, it continues in use, but now it's an agricultural store. So this is how you're trying to use the fabric, the floor plan, the details, the architectural details, to build up a story of how this building developed over time and how it functioned. You don't even have to have a building to be able to do this. You can do it anywhere you want. This is an example from Lagavar in Ballintoy in County Antrim. And I picked this house because there's nothing there. But there was, in the 1830s, you had a nice little complex. It's shown again in the 1860s, but its form has slightly changed. When you look at it there, there's an outshot at the back in the 1830s, which is gone, and the building has elongated. There's also a couple of new houses, new outhouses have been built. And then again, there's change by the 1900s, where you can see there's another outshot has been added then to the back of the building. Now, when we go to the Griffiths valuation, we find out that this is the home of Simon McCurdy. And we can map that then onto the census data, and we find out that, you know, Simon in 1901 was aged 67, and he was with his wife Margaret, who was 70, and their daughter Ellen, who was 22. What's interesting is whenever you come to 1911, we find that Ellen is actually 38, and she's now living in the house with her nephew Edward, who's 11. Presuming in the 10-year period between those census, Simon and Margaret have both died. Why the dates or the age of Ellen are so wrong, it's not sure. I mean, we're out by quite a number, we're nearly out, what, 8-9 years in age. But parking that aside, we can then go to the oral history. And we're building up a picture here. We're using the cartographic sources, we're using the documents and the oral tradition. The oral tradition, this is Ellen McCurdy. She lived there until the 1950s. She died and the farm was sold. Her house became redundant and it fell into ruin, and it was demolished around about 1985. But interesting, that farm has changed hands, it's now in new ownership, but that farm is still known as Ellen's, even though Ellen is now long dead. So that's how you can use these sources of information to piece together the background to the story of a house. And that takes us into what we are about in Fermanagh, the recording and surveying of the vernacular buildings. Now, as Rachel mentioned in her introduction, there is the two elements to what we're about here. The first is the online heritage campus, and much work has been put into this by Rachel and Siobhan in constructing these 4 weeks of activity taught component of the course, where you're taken through bite-sized level through the whole process of researching a building, recording the building, and then writing about the building. So that if you go through the course, you will have the training that you need to be able to go out and do this sort of thing yourself. Because the countryside, like we saw with the Scotland's Rural Past project, the countryside is full of these old buildings whose stories should be recorded. And that then in turn takes us through to the summer event when we get to August, because you don't have to have done the online course. You can come out and join us on the actual surveys, but I think you will benefit much more if you have done the online course, because you will be very knowledgeable. You'll probably know more than me by that stage, and you'll be telling me where I'm making mistakes.